The death of God is about the drying up of a horizon of meaning and of a whole form of human life.
Where do we stand in the illusion it makes? What kind of space are we invited into?
The material relations between people become social relations between things. When we look at toasters, corn, and TVs, we don't see...
We still, to a large extent, live in the interregnum between worlds, if you will, or between paradigms. Not many people in the history of the world have faced that.
Zero Squared is the Zero Books podcast. Kris Saknussemm is a novelist and a multimedia artist. He has published 10 books, including Zanesville, Sea Monkeys, and Private Midnight. As a short story writer, he won the first prize in the Boston Review and River Styx short fiction contests and received the Fiction Collective 2 Award for innovative writing. In addition to publishing in a wide range of journals, such as Opium Magazine, Hotel Amerika, the New England Review, the Hudson Review, Gargoyle, and so on and so on. Kris is a worldly type who recently returned to the United States, and we discuss his culture shock, the decline of the U.S., the rise of Trump, and the liberal response. It's Wednesday, February 22nd, 2017, and I'm Douglas Lane, the publisher of Zero Books and the host of this podcast. Thanks goes out to members of the Zero Books Club. Zero Books Club members receive access to the Inside Zero Books podcast, which sometimes consists of unedited or full-length interviews from the Zero Squared podcast, sometimes features conversations with Zero Books readers about the state of the left, and sometimes features public lectures from Zero Books authors or staff members. The music you're listening to right now is Rhapsody in Blue, performed by Paul Whiteman and George Gershwin, and recorded on a cylinder. Back in the 20s of the 20th century, thanks goes out to the Internet Archive. In just a moment, you'll be listening to Kris Saknussemm and I discuss the rise of Trump and the decline of Amerika. Kris Saknussemm is a cult novelist and a real man. He's lived most of his life abroad, and the New York Times described him this way. Saknussemm is a rare visionary of American culture, a fearless artist with his very own skew on the Western world. His novels include Zanesville, Colors of Compulsion, Eat Jellied Eels and Think Distant Thoughts, and The Humble Assessment. Now, I'm not sure if those are all novels, but those are your books.
Yeah, the last one's a play, actually, but that's all right. No worries.
Okay, so I think the first time we met, and maybe the only time we've met in person, was in Portland at a lazy fascist reading. And just to be clear, that was not like some alt-right group, but a cult publishing label imprint that we were both being published by at the time.
That's right. I remember that day, yep.
What struck me at the time was that you were very different from most writers that I had met up to that point. You didn't seem to have the same provincial middle-class demeanor that I think that I'm, have. But you had you were more of the romantic hero than I was expecting somehow. And I'm not sure if that's, what you're going to make of that compliment but tell people who are listeners a little bit about your background and your bio, if you would.
Okay. Well, I'm from the Bay Area originally, the Berkeley, Oakland area. And I went to school back east. I went to an Ivy League college on a full scholarship and felt very alienated there. Came back, did graduate work at UW in Seattle. And then in my mid-20s, I left Amerika. I see it now that I left very consciously. I thought I was only going away for a couple of years, but I ended up staying away for decades. I lived in the Southern Hemisphere, Australia, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, which people might have heard about. It was formerly New Hebrides. But those Oceania nation states that became independent and decolonized in the 1970s, I at one point was trying to be an anthropologist there. I got very involved in local culture. I did some smuggling. I got involved in things in a way that wasn't entirely approved of by my academic minders in anthropology. And then eventually got out of that, returned to make a base camp in Australia. I was a journalist, photographer, got into public relations and then advertising. And through that, ended up traveling a lot through Asia, Malaysia, Indonesia, most of China at some point. And stayed away really out of America until 2011. Honestly, I came back to see my family here, excuse me, and to do publishing business, book tours and stuff. But I really became one of those expat people, and it's a special breed. I remember actually the day when I was in Hong Kong. That I ended up at this a kind of a club bar place, and I noticed that everybody there was from, I just could feel the vibe that we were all from other parts of the world, and I think that gave me a very special perspective on America. It's influenced my writing a great deal, and it's made me very uncomfortable, frankly, being back. I never feel really at home here. It's a very strange position. You're kind of always a ship at sea in that way,
Yeah, well, the story I remember from when I met you was about just being a short story writer or being a fiction writer, and how your first sale was maybe. Now, tell me if I'm misremembering this, but you sold a story for what at the time to you seemed like a goodly amount of money, and that it had a negative impact on you, that you ended up, I don't know, on a bender or something because of it. Am I misremembering this? I can cut it out if.
No, I think that, there are a couple of stories like that. I think that's probably true. What I remember now is just sort of the larger publishing, business sort of aspect of it, of just that when I started off, there was, so many more places to publish that actually paid good money.
Right.
Now, it's pretty hard to find those, and most of those are backlogged for, about 5 years.
Well, what I remember about that story was you were somebody who was not at all comfortable staying behind your desk or, sort of experiencing the world through a window, but I kind of had more of a rough and tumble, let's get out there and live attitude about your life in general.
Yeah, I did, and I still do. Even though being older, and I think that's had some negative impact in a career sense. But it's meant I've seen some things that I just never would have. And a couple of my friends that who I parted ways with in my 20s, they went into academia or corporate business, and I think they're better off financially in certain ways.
Yeah.
But they've been able to have more stable sort of family lives than I have. But I wouldn't trade that for the world, because there are certain perspectives that you can only get. And I think this is what I learned, is that you do really have to take a risk, and you get rewarded for that in time,
Well, the reason I'm kind of asking about your background, I don't always do that with every guest. Usually it's just like, here are all their credentials, and now let's talk about the topic. But in your case, when I was reading some of your comments on Facebook about your reaction to the election and the inauguration of Trump, it seemed to be coming from a different place, maybe a little bit more of a worldly place than a lot of the reactions I was reading in other parts of, social media or, even in newspapers or online journals. And so I wanted to sort of set that up, that you're someone who's speaking from maybe not pure knowledge, but some sort of experience. So we can come back to that, but I do want to ask you, because you kind of sort of said something that should be followed up. You're not so comfortable in the United States as you might have. Did you expect to be more comfortable than you are?
Yeah, I honestly did. when you come backwards and forwards over the years for, I would always do sort of, like 4 to 6 weeks. And having, been, grown up here, it's very easy to sort of have this illusion that you know what's going on and that you do fit in. And in fact, the moment I really, I came back to Las Vegas, which I think is a very good place to re-enter America.
Why is that?
Well, it's filled with people from all over. It's one of the most diverse and also integrated cities in America. Mm-hmm. And those are two different things, if you know what I mean. I think that a lot of cities are multicultural, but they may not be very well integrated, at street and neighborhood level. And I think Vegas is much more so than a lot of people realize. It's such a peculiar city. It's so very different residentially than it is, what it seems like to people visiting and just seeing the Strip, Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of secret worlds within it, and I'm looking forward to going back there. But even coming back to a place that's pretty open and I was going to say forgiving, but let's say welcoming in a kind of weird sense, it was still very apparent to me that America has really changed very, very dramatically. One of the things I do, although I haven't been an academic in the past, I have been teaching the last couple of years, and one of the classes that I'm teaching right now has to do with change and how change happens, how we identify it in our own lives, how we identify it on the cultural scale, and so I was very alert to that, very attuned to that. And the moment I really, was here for, say, after that first month back, I realized, oh dear, I am in a foreign place,
What was foreign? What happened that made you realize that?
I think there have been several movements that have taken a long time to really take hold. Certainly the technological development. When I was in college, it was still possible to believe that people like us, artists and writers, were kind of heroic figures.
Yeah.
There was still that residual cool, but really were people who were, 10, 20 years, earlier than us.
Yeah.
And then there was this whole shift, the paradigm shifted to Silicon Valley, to apps and startups and the computer, revolution, some of which has been really terrific. And I've benefited from it in other aspects of my art in terms of making music and stuff. But it shifted the whole value of who was really running the show and what young people wanted to be. And so I felt very much isolated from that. And I don't think we're ever going to go back, Mm-hmm. That was one thing.
So now you don't write fiction or journalism, you write content, right? We're all content creators.
That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Exactly.
Yeah.
So it affects the publishing business. It affects the deep tissue aspect of the actual art and the writing that we're doing. It affects how we relate to audience. It's greatly affected my attention span. I don't know about yours.
Oh, it's terrible. It's horrible. Yeah.
But that's a very, very good way to symbolize, abbreviate, and capture a lot of the feeling I had, which, you can say that would have been something that you could have elsewhere, say in Papua New Guinea or South Africa or Australia. It's caught up there too, of course. I mean, we live in that global situation now, but it seemed much more intense coming back to America. I also felt like a lot of the cultural mythology that I had grown up on is now effectively exhausted, I used to think America was kind of endlessly capable of kind of refurbishing itself on that level. And I'm not so sure that's true anymore. If you think of it in a Jungian sense, I think our collective unconscious is just very tired. You see that in the endless reboots of film franchises, old TV shows. Look at Broadway, I mean, it's one remake after another. And I just felt like I was walking around this recycled car graveyard of American culture.
Yeah.
And some of that's kind of cool, you know. I mean, but even that sort of post-apocalyptic, energy isn't as exciting as it used to be.
No, that post-apocalyptic energy is like 20 years old.
Yeah.
Or older. I mean, it's like, it's from the 90s, I think. Or even earlier. Maybe it goes back to, I don't know, cyberpunk.
Well, I was thinking about cyberpunk the other day. Do you remember? I mean, like that's sort of a whole world of William Gibson, Rudy Rucker, a lot of people I really admire as writers. And remember the old magazine Mondo 2000?
Oh yeah,
was the precursor of Wired. When I think about that now, all of that seems just like so yesterday. I can't. It's very bizarre because it was, so forward looking and edgy at the time.
Right. And
now I just think, I don't know if that, I just can't get excited about it.
Look, here's the thing about Mondo 2000, which is interesting, which is the issue of Mondo 2000 that I always remember first is one where they had a woman a kind of half naked woman on the cover. I'm not sure if I'm remembering it properly, but a half-naked woman on the cover with goggles on, virtual reality goggles on, a bra that was shaped like hands that had wires coming out of it, and something she was wearing on her crotch that looked like it might have, some sort of artificial penis or dildo or something, but not too explicit or anything.
Right.
And, it said something like, virtual sex is coming, or, something like that. And that was weird. And, that is here.
Yeah.
I mean, but it's, as you might expect, it's not something that everyone's broadcasting. I don't know how many people have these devices, but I've seen YouTube videos of these devices that, you have a dildo and then you have some sort of cup, and with the walls will move. So as the dildo is stroked, then the walls of the cup react. And so basically over the internet, lovers could stimulate each other electronically, right? Or digitally.
Yeah.
And there's nothing, it seems sad to me. And it didn't seem sad when I saw that Mondo 2000 cover.
I think that's a really good point, that somehow the realization of this, the reality has a very, very different mood and feel to it than, and I don't think that's as simple as, it was exciting to think about as a kind of a fantasy for the future, and now, ho-hum, it's here. I really don't, I think there's something more going on. And I think there's a kind of spiritual malaise that hangs over, particularly America now, that's influencing these things. I don't think it is just simply, we were promised the future, now it's here, now we're bored. Here we are, entertain us. I don't buy that it's that simple.
The new devices, the affect of them, or what they remind me of, is something like a truck stop. You realize, if you actually did that, you'd have to clean that thing, and it just would be unsettling and sort of alienating in a way.
Yeah.
But I think that was always built into the idea, that was always going to have to be part of virtual sex, right? Some sort of mechanical device, which you're really being intimate with. The physicality of it would be kind of gross. And, the vision itself, there's something wrong with the whole vision.
You've heard of computer sex, but is there really such a thing? Absolutely. Having sex with an online partner is easy to learn. I'll show you how to reach a cyber sex climax. We'll also visit others who have mastered the art of one-handed typing. So let's get started. So I'm just kind of gonna get a general idea of who's here, what's going on. Now let's see if we can find someone interested in having a little cyber sex. I'm gonna put, I'm very horny. And I'm looking for some good cybersex. Are you interested? Okay, and click send and wait for a response. And he puts yes with lots of S's.
Well, here's one way to think about this. You know the writer J.G. Ballard. I would suspect you're probably a fan of his.
I am. Yeah.
You know, his point was that technology and these sort of future-leaning things already affect us in so many ways, psychologically and erotically, at very subliminal levels, you know? And he was more interested in subtle sort of forms of that and strange variations. And I think, you know, he might say that the problem with the kind of magazine cover that you're talking about, and I remember that, is that it's just too explicit to be interesting. You know, it's actually a very crude image that doesn't really tell us anything new about our psychology or our erotic interests, or, you know, it's kind of juvenile. And I think that's in some sense what has happened across our society, is that we're just not growing up. You know, it's becoming more and more juvenile. And what was fun, you know, back in the treehouse when we were 11 and 12 in the old days, that's not so interesting if that's all you ever have, and you've just kind of made all that more mechanical and electronic. You know, it's not a new idea. It's just and it extends now deep into adulthood, which I think is kind of pathetic.
Yeah, it does. You know, I recall about 6 or 7 years ago now, but in early days of podcasting, a couple people came to visit me who had been listening to my podcast. It was amazing. Like, I had fans showing up on my doorstep, but, you know, they weren't your typical fans. They were 50-year-old men who, you know, had careers, who were actually much more successful in life than I was. But we went out and had a drink and all that kind of thing. And, you know, I talking to them, these are people who worked in the arts, you know, along with the state, like, you know, like the NEA, but not the NEA, like state versions of that. And I realized that they're 50 years old. They were still talking about their dads and still talking about what they wanted to be when they grew up.
Yeah. Yeah. See, this is the kind of thing I'm talking. And while this may be happening in other parts of the world, certainly related, you know, places like Australia and Canada, America is the hub of this. I'm pretty certain that in my world travels, I feel that way. And I think it's beyond funny. It's tragic. It really is. And it's actually quite scary because...
And it's not these people's fault. I mean, that's the thing. These were good people and they had real careers and lives, and they weren't lazy or immature for our culture, you know?
No.
It was something going on to them as much as it was something they were doing, I think.
I'll tell you about a waking nightmare I had in Las Vegas about the time that I really started to feel as if the alienation coming back to America was just not going to subside. It had just gone dark, and I was with some friends walking along, you know, Las Vegas Boulevard, the Strip. And, you know, even though you've got a huge wave of people behind you, you're walking in your direction, you always feel like there are more people coming towards you. So you're sort of swimming through this salmon ladder thing, right? And I had this little vision in my head, you know, that like in various movies and TV shows where a character can somehow read people's minds, and it becomes this chaos of noise, you know, and they have to, you know, they try to cover their ears, and their own head looks like it's going to explode because they're getting all these channels, you know, right? Well, I had just the reverse of that. I had this sudden, just terribly deep and real feeling that what if there wasn't all this internal monologues and dialogues coming at me? What if there was just a lot of darkness and silence, that there just wasn't, anything going on? And it was a very real kind of hallucination, if you like. I suddenly felt these waves of people coming at me that there was nothing being broadcast,
Well, we don't have to think anymore because every thought we have, we put on Facebook.
Yeah.
So if you want to know what people are thinking, look at their Twitter feed.
That's exactly right. And then it's forgotten,
Yeah, right. It's very disturbing. So let's talk about Trump. I mean, this setup, I feel like actually I'm sort of truncating the thought because like we really could. In fact, let's not talk about Trump yet. Let's go a couple more steps because we've talked about the symptoms of this, but we haven't talked about the causes of this very much. And I think it's too simple to blame like smartphones or Twitter or something like that. I think there's something else going on too. But what do you think it is? Do you think it's the technology primarily that is the problem, or? Well,
I think that technology has become a kind of force unto itself within culture. Thoreau said back in the middle of the 19th century, we've become the tools of our tools. And I think there was an anxiety well before the Industrial Revolution that systems, that cultural protocols were commandeering actual social values and individual values. And we've gotten to a more extreme version of that now. And technology is simply one of the means of that and one of the manifestations of it. There are a lot of things that we have been fooled about, that we've thought that more change had happened. I think that we thought more change had happened in a civil rights sense, We see, a handful of African-American millionaires in, various celebrity functions, whether it be Chris Rock in comedy or, Kanye West in music or basketball players. We think, oh, okay, we've solved that problem.
Yeah, well, a black president.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, has things really changed for the vast majority of black people? No, we forget about that.
Actually, I think on the one hand, things have not changed. In fact, things have gotten worse over the last, say, 8 years for black Americans. But it has been for a longer period of time, last 30, 40 years, a growing African-American middle class, and that more and more people of color are going to college, and more people of color are not living in poverty. The numbers are slowly improving there, and it's.
Well, I'd like to just query that a little bit, and here's my thought on that. I think what's happened is we have moved the bar or changed the boundaries of what defines middle class. When I was growing up in Berkeley and Oakland, there was a very pronounced what was then seen as a black middle class in terms of small business, black-owned small business. Barbershops, beauty parlors, restaurants, on and on and on. Those, you can go to Oakland now, and none of those shops, none of those businesses exist, or they haven't existed for years. They've been completely gentrified. That is entirely gone. So now when we say middle class, we mean, okay, someone who's really a professional, someone who's got a law degree, someone who's, working at what was, when I was a kid, would have been upper middle class, just the day-to-day things of running a business that used to hold a community together. Well, that's not good enough anymore. No one wants to do that. No one wants to. I mean, I wonder if we've increased the black middle class. I don't think we have. I think we've put pressure on people to be superstars and multimillionaires, to be doctors, lawyers. That's the kind of success that matters now. Running your own business, how many black plumbers are there?
I do think you're right that the number of just small businesses in general, and certainly black small businesses, is decline. And if you just look at the absolute raw numbers, the median household income for black families is less than half of what the median household income is for white families.
Well, there's almost no participation in the skilled trades. And we've abandoned that training ground for, I suppose predominantly young men, but you could say for everyone in America. That's just simply not an option. And we're going to have all these jobs that we need to have done, and no one has the skills for them anymore.
Well, that's a trend speaking as a Marxist type, that's a trend under capitalism, is that you're de-skilled. I mean, from the beginning, that's always been the trend. So you start as an artisan, and then when you're a factory worker, you don't have anywhere near the range of skills you did as a private artisan. And that's just becoming more and more the case. So.
Hello. You people know a lot about trucks. Bing, 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 bong. China. Bing, bing, bong. Obamacare. Bing, 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 bong, 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 bong. Get those lights off. Bing, 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 bing. China. Bong, bong. Bing, 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 bong. Turn off the lights. I'm really rich. Bing, bing, bong. $1 million. Bing, bing, bong. It's Rubio. Bing, 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 bong. Bong, 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 bong. And by the way, bing, 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 bing. I love China. Bing, bing, bong, bong. Bing, 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 bong. How can you not love China?
But yeah, let's talk about Trump. Because Trump, do you think Trump is a symptom of all of this, or is it a reaction to all of this?
He's both, and I think a kind of crystallization. I mean, in some ways, he really is just a phenomenal American figure. He's absolutely essentially American. He's larger than life. He's grotesque. He embodies a kind of weird hybrid mix of some great figures of the past, P.T. Barnum being one of them. Yeah. He brings to Flashpoint really 200 years of American history. And I think he's a crisis that we need to have. He's a kind of a great American monster, and if we can survive, it may be the lancing of the boil that we need. I think in the short term, it's going to be a little bit rough.
Yeah.
I personally think it's going to be it's already rough for reasons that a lot of my liberal friends and colleagues don't worry as much about.
For instance?
Well, okay, I was thinking about this the other day. I had a friend who I really admired, many years ago, and I remember I was with him the day that he realized that he really did have a heroin addiction. And the way he put it in a kind of ironic way was, well, at least now I've consolidated all my problems. And I think for a lot of my liberal friends, now Trump represents the ultimate evil and the focal point for everything. He's now responsible for things that, really don't have anything to do with him, or which he's benefited from, which have brought him into power. But he's now kind of the focus of everything. And I think that's very unhealthy. I think it's going to cloud a lot of other issues. I think it's going to distract us from things and thoughts that we should have from other perspectives. Mm-hmm. And I think it's going to close down a lot of debate. I mean, I've had discussions with people who say, I agree with what you're saying, but we can't talk about that now. We've got to circle our wagons, mm-hmm. as liberals and progressives, and we've got to toe the party line. And so effectively he's hacked us. He is there's an old thing in both mechanical engineering and information science that a system with one oscillating frequency can co-opt the oscillating frequency of another system. And I feel that's what he's done. He's changed the debate for all of us. He's limiting now the way that, say, even people like you and I who share many, many similar views, he's controlling how we speak, how we communicate. And I think that's the number one danger. But I really have had some discussions, and I think you have too, with people, via Facebook or directly face-to-face, where, the message is, let's not talk about that now because the emergency is too great,
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because some of the people who I knew on the far left, or who consider themselves on the far left, who were, say, going to vote for the Green Party in the election, would say things like, look, if Trump wins, that will wake people up. We'll get the liberals and the left off its ass and into the streets again. There will start to be real opposition again. We've had 8 years of a happy face on all the problems of American society, and worse than that, if you stand up and criticize Barack Obama, you can even be called like a racist. People don't want to get out on the streets against this guy. The left does not do mass protests against this guy. He's subduing our activity. But during that time, you had Occupy Wall Street and a building up of, I think, institutional and economic analysis because of the economic crisis, but also because we weren't focused on Washington. We were focused on, I was anyways, larger, sometimes more abstract structural problems. And so now everything's political again. Everything's about DC again. So on the one hand, you do get more political protest. On the other hand, it's all swept up. A lot of the details get swept aside, and it's all swept up against Trump. I'm not sure. It seems like you're kind of screwed either way. If you have a liberal in office who people kind of like, then you don't protest as much, but you maybe look a little beyond that, a little deeper. With Trump, you don't look very far.
Well, here's an analogy. What I see happening, because the extremity of the Christian right and forces that are anti-intellectual, anti-scientific, major scientists, and I'm thinking of people like Richard Dawkins, come forward with also an extreme position. They now make it look like, yes, science has all the answers. Science is no longer the skeptical art, the open-minded art, the ability to ask questions, the ability to experiment and test theories, the ability to revise itself and to update its sense of truth. I think that's what's happened to the Liberal Party and the liberal perspective. I think people now feel like we can't criticize anything. We can't look at the fact that 26,000 bombs were dropped in 7 countries during, the last year of Obama's, administration. That's unfaithful. It's become a religious position now. Yeah. We say, when the Republicans or the conservatives go low, we go high. Well, that's absolutely not true.
Not only have we been bombing 7 countries, but the really disturbing thing is how Obama expanded executive power over the last 8 years. And so now we have someone in office who seems to be unhinged and has the right to kill American citizens without trial or, without pressing any charges, just create a kill list and use drones to go assassinate people.
You see, just what you've said, and I absolutely agree with it, and I'm totally on the same page with you. I know some liberal people who would think that was almost treasonous, what you said, of making that connection of saying, oh, Obama expanded executive orders, and now that's given Trump more leeway. That, yes, that is in fact what's happened. And we can't say that because, we somehow are then supporting or releasing Trump from, responsibility. No, we're not. We're trying to historically explain how we got to where we are now.
I talked to a guy named Bill Ivey, who is a friend of John Podesta's. He's actually one of the people who got published by WikiLeaks. One of his emails got out, kind of became viral. And even though he was a Clinton insider, I said that to him, and I didn't say it maybe quite that strongly, but I asked him, will Obama, before he leaves office, repeal some of these powers and do something to constrain Trump? I didn't like it when Obama could do these things. I certainly won't like it when Trump can. And he explained why that wasn't going to happen and all. But he didn't. Why Obama wasn't going to repeal anything. But he didn't get offended, and he certainly he agreed, basically, that the executive branch had become too powerful and that something needed to be done about that. And that's a Clinton insider. So I think that the flock is more partisan than even, party insiders sometimes.
Well, here's what I further object to, and I agree with that position. The argument that I've heard, and I in part understand, but I disagree with, is that Obama's push for the strength of the executive powers was in response to a highly oppositional Congress.
Yeah.
I get that. My answer back to that is that I think the Democratic Party has not emphasized congressional elections. No one has cared about that. We've lost 1,000 Democratic positions during the Obama administration to the Republican Party because no one cared enough about that. No one was active enough. No one was occupying enough at that level,
Yeah.
So we lose the House, we lose the Senate. And so, yes, the president is in an oppositional sort of mode. But what happens when Mr. Trump comes along and he has the legislature? It's not so good then, is it? No one stopped to think about that. Well, what happens when you have control of the Senate and the House, No,
I know. The thing about the, drone programs and kill lists is that doesn't even have anything to do with regular, legislation. That's just some.
Absolutely not.
But yeah, on the level of doing executive orders, that's also a problem. And you don't. And he doesn't even need executive orders, considering how much power is consolidated in the Republican Party. Although it's an interesting question as to whether or not Trump is a Republican and whether or not he's going to have to go to war with his own party to get some of the things done that he claims to want to do. But what I really wanted to get to before we get to the end of this conversation is your concern about the possibility of nuclear conflict and your look at Trump's foreign policy, such as it is.
Yeah. Look, that is my number one concern. I mean, I am in no way denying liberal friends' concerns about the laundry lists of his treatment of the media, his misogyny and treatment of women, concerns about reproductive rights, women's health care, an appeal to racism and xenophobia, his bizarre stance on immigration, on and on and on it goes. I absolutely get all of that. But here's the deal. The commander-in-chief is one of the key other titles for the president. Right. There are a lot of powers that are built into the Constitution. We know he doesn't care a lot about the Constitution. We know he probably hasn't read it. Yeah. But nevertheless, we have all agreed to those. And I don't see any aspect of his foreign policy that is not a cause for concern, starting with he has total disdain for NATO, total, and they are our major allies. He has no program or connection with cultures and nation states that are most like America, the UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, no connection at all. Openly hostile to neighbor Mexico, no program whatsoever with Central America or South America. He is openly pulling back humanitarian, economic, and larger involvement aid across the entire continent of Africa. Gone. We know that his positions on Russia and China are highly dubious. I just read an article in the New York Times today that said China is posed to become a possible genuine superpower. Well, I'm sorry, they are a superpower. And you don't have to go to the country to see that. That's just nonsense. China is a superpower. It's wake up, New York Times, about that.
Right.
The position on Israel and Palestine, I think, is grievous. Mm-hmm. I think that we are potentially enshrining a right-wing government and losing all hope of a two-state solution there that is going to severely impact on the Israeli economy eventually. I think it's going to severely isolate America because of their support. And I think it's going to further destabilize not only the Middle East, but the world. I don't see any aspect where he is trying to diffuse already complex situations. And in every instance, in every theater around the world, he's upping the ante for tension.
See, now, here's the thing. I agree with what you're saying, only I have a caveat on that, because I have some friends who are Trump supporters. Weirdly, like people who used to be leftists who became Trump supporters in the last year. It's kind of a disturbing trend. Not just some of them, not just Trump supporters, but like members of the alt-right. I mean, flipping. It was crazy. But I do hear from them sometimes, and what they would say to all of that is, what you're overlooking is how Trump is abandoning U.S. imperialism. That is no longer, the U.S. is no longer going to be the policeman of the world. That we are going to retreat into our own borders and look after our own interests. That this will ultimately be that the nationalism of Trump is also like his peace candidate card. Now,
I hear that. Could I suggest though that there needs, and I think that's a really wonderful, rhetorically adept, positive spin on what he's doing.
Yeah.
Could I say though that I think that the shift from an imperialism is such a good, loaded, and I think very true or accurate word, that a sudden shift from imperialism to isolationism is like trying to ascend too far too fast as a scuba diver. I think we're going to get nitrogen narcosis. I think there's a problem. I think we need more transition. If it were that, I would think great.
I mean, I don't believe that it is. First of all, nationalism and aggression are not completely disconnected, right? I mean, you can be, you can, right? So, you can certainly retreat into your own borders as far as being really only interested in your own self-interest, but still end up at war. It's just, so the target is shifting. It's rather than these small targets where we can have influence and we're easily going to stomp around. Now our targets are the people who we're competing with on the world stage economically, like China. And so I would say that we're more likely to have something happen that we don't want. I mean, when you're an imperialist, you actually are aggressive. You know, you set up, you're kind of a bully, right? So you pick fights. This could end up in a situation where we get a fight that we're not prepared for, that we don't want, that, you know, it just comes to us because of bungling, basically.
Well, and here's the thing about pulling back into one's own borders, and this sort of links back around to our discussion that we started with in terms of technology and, you know, how culture works. You haven't retreated back into your own borders if you go to basically a shanty township in South Africa, and some guy comes up to you and goes, "Hey, Holmes," and throws you, you know, a South Central LA hand sign. You know, that person, you know, they've been infected by American culture.
We cannot put the genie back in the bottle and suddenly just pretend like this isn't a global culture.
No, we absolutely can't. And, you know, I think this is the thing. This may be just the simplistic sort of overall umbrella to look at this. We really are in a global culture now, and we're never going to change that again. And unless we start to acknowledge that and become aware on multiple levels of how that has influenced and eclipsed and damaged other cultures, then we're just not being authentic and you know, really, you know,
right.
We're being disingenuous, you know. It can't just be the way we want it to be.
Do you think that we could end up, because of Trump's character and the imbalance of power in his administration? In other words, I think Paul Ryan is ultimately a more powerful figure, with something more along the lines of a regular Republican far-right administration?
In the sense of say, a Reagan type of thing?
Yeah, like
No,
a Reagan. Like Reagan or Bush Jr.
Look, I think, well, there are a couple of things. I first knew Reagan, in as a very young person when he was the governor of California. There was never a sense that Reagan was actually a real person with a real agenda, a real program, a real ideological view of life. He was always an actor reading lines. He was scripted and controlled. There was a guy, one of his best friends who was not an actor, was a man named Dart, who was the head of the Rexall drug company. Mm-hmm. He famously, when Ronnie became governor of California, he insisted that we invade Mexico because he'd had a bad vacation. He was getting older and was demented. And Ronnie, had to explain to his old friend and neighbor that was a little beyond the call of what a governor of California could do, and that maybe try another hotel the next time you go to, the beach. Mm-hmm. There was never any sense I mean, I was astonished when I was living in Australia when Reagan, the funeral ceremony and the sanctimonious. It was like a pope. I mean, my God! But no one really believed he was anything more than a figurehead for how And the only question was how shadowy the puppeteers behind him were, in your view. Uh-huh. But he was definitely not a puppeteer. He was a puppet. Same with Bush. I mean, I think everyone realized that certainly that Cheney and his group were, obviously really in power. I don't think we feel that so much. I think one of the great fears is that actually Donald Trump actually could be more in charge than a lot of,
No, I agree with you that he is actually, there's no one, that's why there's going to be a war on in the administration, because he really is in charge.
Yeah.
And I believe that completely. Whatever he decides is going to be what happens, but he also doesn't have a coherent set of he doesn't have an ideology. He doesn't really have a vision beyond I want to be in charge.
No, he's entirely really a 6 or 7 year old child.
Right.
There is he wouldn't have an idea of what an ideological platform is, let alone an agenda. He isn't even on the level of a to-do list for the day. He writes down some notes and some people hand him, and said, remember you said this yesterday, maybe we should look at this today. That's the danger psychologically. But in terms of a personality, he is very much in charge in a way that I don't think Bush, Bush Jr., I don't think Reagan was.
Well, I guess that's what I'm asking is, does the fact that he's an authoritarian personality and wants to be in charge and control mean that even without the ability to think things through and set an actual agenda, he will be able to be in control? Or will he be at the kind of at his own whim and really acting someone else's agenda out, even though the buck really does stop with him?
Well, I think that to his credit, there are a few points that he has that, this is another thing that concerns me when we talk about the dysfunction within the liberal discourse about how to actually analyze him. I see some very big differences about his position on a couple of issues, which, they not surprisingly come from areas that he has had exposure to, that his businesses have been involved with. I think his positions on things, like trade and immigration are very different in the sense that they're personal, whether we, accept them or hate them or whatever. Mm-hmm. Whereas I think that his positions on, say, courting the evangelical support is completely insincere and ridiculous. That's manufactured. Right. He doesn't care about that at all. I don't really think that his position on Israel and the support for the Netanyahu government is sincere. I think that's politically manipulated and not real.
Right.
But I think he's dead serious about the wall. I think he would actually try to bring jobs back to Pontiac, Michigan, if he could. He's not going to be able to, but so there is within his attempt at some sort of program a lot of differences in levels of his commitment. And I think we see that in his tweets, the things that he tweets more about. He obviously tweets the most about himself and how he's treated in the media,
Right.
Which is, it would be hilarious if it weren't so scary. So I think that what I notice even in media outlets such as the New York Times is that kind of everything that he says is treated with an equal level of concern. And I don't think that's ever true of anyone. I think we should be trying to break that down. If we're going to give him headlines and news coverage and analysis, then we should be analyzing what he's actually doing and where the priorities lie. So my number one concern with him is that he has managed to have a media strategy that has bamboozled everyone into being at the same level that he is, where we're going to march, we're going to express these grand attitudes of resistance, but we're not going to analyze or break down any of the specific points. We're not going to prioritize those. We're not going to deal with the most serious issues first. He has achieved a tremendous victory in the sense of transforming our debates, our discussions completely into his terms. The idea of being a good citizen and not allowing bullying or hate crimes and stuff, well, that should go without saying, Right. But if that's the level that we're concerned about and we're attributing these things to him, I mean, first of all, I'm not convinced that we have any more of that now than we did, 6 months ago. I'm really not sure about that. I think that I don't trust the media's reportage, enough to believe.
If you dig in, the media is not lying about this stuff. I mean, because if you dig in, what they'll say is, well, there's been this report here, there's been that report there. This is how this is the methodology of that the people use to gather this kind of information, and none of this is conclusive. So the media will say that. They'll just say that like in the 5th paragraph or something. But anyway.
But how do we then, I mean, I would rather look at, if we're going to hold Trump to account, I would rather be looking at things that he is directly doing, as you said, than things that are being somehow released in this sort of Jungian way within society. I mean, sure, we can get to that level at some point. Yeah, there are some, things coming to the boil, but those have been on the boil for a long time. I think if that's what we're starting with is in terms of our criticism and concern of him, I think we're missing the point. I don't see they're not.
I agree with you completely. And here's the other way. The way I would put it is not in terms of Jung, but that's a fine way to do it. But just when you are at that level, you're talking on the level of trying to control individuals.
Yes,
you're really working on the level of culture and politeness and citizenship. It's the politics of a schoolmarm,
Yes. Yes, it is.
Which some people, there needs to be school marms, but that shouldn't be the people who are leading an actual political struggle. It's not like everything comes down to making sure you wipe your nose and wear clean underwear.
Well, here's a question back to you, Doug. Do you think that in any sort of optimistic, positive way that this is going to be a wake-up call to the liberal perspective to not only just organize and activize, but to really redefine its agenda, to really redefine how it's not just functioning, but to what end is it functioning toward?
I don't know. I think that there's a potential for that, but I think that what people are going to find is that there's a fairly well-defined split amongst the people who consider themselves to be on the left or progressive. And the split might come down to how comfortable you are with the status quo. It might come down to some sort of ideological commitments that are often unspoken. But I think that a great many of the people who have kind of dominated what's considered left discourse for the last 8 years are going to fall away because they're actually not, they're not on the left. They're in the center.
Mm-hmm.
They just shouldn't be put in charge of any kind of movement for change.
Right.
That in science fiction, for instance, people are taken to be very radical for having points of view which are coming out of, gender studies departments and out of elite universities. But if you look carefully at those ideologies and those ideas, a good part of them is we should never try to set up new standards or norms in our society. That any kind of attempt for power is oppressive. And that it all comes down to creating safety and respect for people who are hurt. That's the foundation of the politics coming out of universities right now, I think. And what that is a politics of conformity and stasis.
I'd go a little further because, and I know that that you're a parent, and I see this in the universe. You know what that is? It is an abdication of being any kind of authority figure or parent. Right. And if you are in the universities today, that's what you see in all of the academic departments. It's a complete fear of actually taking on responsibility and leadership. So who gets those positions? Well, the administration. Right. So then you can be the rebellious teenager or preteen and complain about the administration. It happens again and again. It's just this fear of it's a fear of taking on the leadership role and therefore being criticized for exerting too much power. That's a tremendous liberal fear, I think.
Yeah. So people who aren't afraid of that are going to be the ones who lead. And it has tended to be over the last 8 years or so that the people who weren't afraid of that were either duplicitous about their desire for power. Like, in other words, they weren't afraid of it, but they knew that they had to pretend like they weren't seeking power, or they'd just been on the right. That's how it seems to me. I mean, but actually even there's a lot, like in science fiction circles, the battle was between two groups in science fiction, between the far right, this new alt-right. I mean, I think that the alt-right is being very much the same as like the rabid puppies. It's like the same group, right?
Right.
So you have the rabid puppies on one side, and then you had the liberal establishment of the Democratic Party, of science fiction on the other. And neither one of them wanted to claim, the rabid puppies would be ideological, but the sad puppies wouldn't. So you had the sad puppies and you had the liberal establishment, and neither one of them wanted to claim that they were ideological or had any, or were questing for power, or trying to hold on to power. They both wanted to say, oh, we just represent standard, normal, stasis, everyday values.
Right.
And you're the one who's trying to grab power. And if they had just both accepted and admitted, yeah, this is a contest about ideas within science fiction, about political ideas in science fiction, we are fighting, it would have been much more civilized.
Right. Okay. Yeah. What's that denial of the conflict? Well,
they didn't deny conflict, but both sides denied that they wanted something, that they were seeking power.
Yeah, they wanted to win.
Yeah, right.
That I think that extends to the whole liberal program in such a very, very broad way. And I think it's why a lot of people, and I'm one of them, feel that smugness has so permeated the liberal perspective that I have to just step back from it. I think that, there's almost an assumption that you're going to just toe a party line that no one has really bothered to articulate. And you can see this at sort of the dinner party level that, unless you have an exact sort of, you tick off the boxes of things that you agree to kind of mindlessly, and therefore you might ask, well, why should we talk about them at all if we all have the same position on them? There can be this huge uproar, and people go, oh, my God, you can't possibly believe that. And you think, yeah, I actually do, and here's why. And that's, of course, not what people want to hear at all. And I really have some sympathy for, I have very few conservative students that I'm aware of. But those that do come forward or make, presentations of that in class or in their writing, I have a lot of support for, because I think that they're ostracized, they're looked down on in ways that, if it was if the situation were reversed, we would be horrified, right. And we would be particularly horrified if the victims were, a female or a person of color. We would just think, oh my, this just can't happen. Right. So we're killing off all these channels of discourse because.
Yeah, but you know what? It doesn't matter if you're a woman or you're a person of color if you're a conservative. Then you can be ostracized, and suddenly all that goes away.
I guess that's a beautiful way to simplify what I'm saying. Exactly. That's all you need. Then you're open game.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. You're open game as you can be a transsexual, lesbian, person of color, but if you're right wing and out about that, and basically say, yeah, I'm totally free market and I more power to the police. Well, everything else was erased. At that point, you're a scumbag at that point.
Yeah.
Which is which I think again, but see that move to denounce rather than to engage is a move where you're trying to avoid your claim to power, weirdly, because you're saying, I don't have to argue this. This isn't something that I need to prove.
Yes, I think that's a good point. You say, well, we all know what we're talking about.
This is some greater authority is at work here. So I'm just going with what is right. I'm not making a claim. I'm not actually trying.
Exactly. And then further, I'm not going to admit that I have made just this giant moral assertion about the validity of my position. It's deeply insincere. It really, really is. Exactly right. I think that is exactly what you've helped me see what some of my.
I live online. That's the problem. So I get huge doses of this all the time. Facebook, 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 and I want you as my friend and email to you. They will send saying that you have a friend request on Facebook. Facebook, when I want you to confirm my friend request and determine if you've ever seen me, then you will say yes.